great. All right, now I'm on the spot. Okay, so let's see how we can do this. So let's start with that opening, that first bell chord. All right. So we're still going to use the 12 transpositions and the 12 inversions as a means to relate notes, but we're going to then form networks using these operations, and then it's really the networks we'll be comparing, and not the notes themselves. So let's start with A, F sharp, and B. I'm writing them like they're arranged on the page, right? So you can arrange them in different ways. When I was showing the networks for permutations, I had arranged them horizontally to show that they were passing through time. So here now I'm arranging them vertically to show that they're part of a chord. The way you arrange them really doesn't matter, as long as they're consistent, so that you can see the isographies. Okay, so I guess a very simple way to do this would be to label them all, say, by transpositions. This would be one way to proceed. The problem with this is that we're not going to break out of these equivalence classes that we had earlier. So if we look for other networks that have the same design, the notes within them will still be in the same class. We really haven't expanded upon Fort system at all. So what we want to do here is we want to use some inversion operations. That will then create a more inclusive type of situation. I realize that I'm standing directly in front of my network based on there I am. Okay, so there's the network. Fair enough. So now when you do this, when you add now inversions to the network, we can't do this just willy-nilly and have it respect the closure of the group. For example, let's just review this. Hopefully when I wrote T9, that was pretty clear, that if you add 9 semitones to an A, you get an F sharp. Okay? But how about I? Let's review I. So how do we figure out the subscript here? Remember, A is pitch class 9. F sharp is pitch class 6. So how do we figure out this? You add them instead of find their difference. Their difference gives you the subscript for transposition. Their sum gives you the subscript for inversion. So you add those together, 15 mod 12 is 3. What would this be? And this one? All well and good, but unfortunately, this is not a well-formed network. And by well-formed, I mean that the operators are composing together as you would expect for this small TTO group. When I compose together 2 different inversions, I don't get an inversion. I should get a transposition. Yeah. Again, if you're looking for an analogy here, something like, I don't know, something really simple like, how about this? I'll try it this way. I know they look like donuts, but they're intended to be these little nodes, and the O's represent that these are all odd. Right? And so then if I add a certain number to an odd number to get another odd number, well, you know, that should be, what would that be? It would be some kind of addition by an even number, right? So, yeah. If this were to be, say, even, then this would have to be adding by an odd number. Right? Likewise here, this would also have to be adding by odd number. But this has to be even. Right? So again, if I form certain networks of odd and even numbers, then if I speak of certain operations that relate them, there are only certain kinds that would maintain the consistency of the group. Likewise here, 2 inversions compose together to make a transposition, just like 2 odds compose together to make an even. Yeah. So we want to go back to the transposition we had before, which was T2. Ah, there we go. Now this reflects the closure of the group, and it also reflects the fact that I can put other notes in here, and it would yield the same results. It would all be true. Yeah. So what we've done here is that we've sort of evacuated the nodes, and we're left with the network. And it is this network that then we will be comparing to other networks, rather than the individual pitch classes. Yeah. But let's put them back, because I missed them. So let's see, A, sharp. Right, fair enough. Now there are other ways to arrange this, right? And so just like if you have three numbers, the intervals between them, you're going to have, well, either all, of the same type, or, two of one of the other. So we could say have the transposition be this one, and then have these be the inversions. So there are a number of ways you can actually interpret a pitch class set using these. So this would work as well. So we could have, can't remember what we had, it was 3, I believe, and this was, what was that? 8. So this would also be viable. So you can see there's probably lots of ways to interpret a pitch class set using networks. Lots of ways, as long as it's well formed. So we can either have 3 transpositions, or we can have 2 inversions and 1 transposition. We can't have 2 transpositions and 1 inversion. We can't have 3 inversions. So there's only a certain way to do it. Okay, so get to where this can actually show us something, Murphy. Okay, we'll do. So let's go back to, let's see, I like this one. So let's use this. And let's make these the inversions. That allows us to, again, be more inclusive. This is I9, this is I5. Is that right? No, it doesn't look right. I3, thank you. Right. So here's my challenge to you. One of those other 2 bell chords we can essentially configure as a network that looks exactly like this. One of the other 2 bell chords, we can choose a network interpretation for it that looks exactly like this one, which is pretty interesting, right? Again, it suggests some kind of affinity between the 2 bell chords, even though it might not be apparent from, say, our usual sort of equivalence class approach. All right, well, I'll get you closer. It's the 3rd one. It's the one with G, C, and F. So first of all, if we're going to interpret G, C, and F, so it matches this, can we do that? Well, it's important that whatever the single transposition is, or whatever the transpositions are in the network, that this interval be present in the other set. So that's a whole step. Is there a whole step in here? There is. From what to what? And it's actually important to say from what to what, because this is a directed arrow. This is not an interval class. It's a directed arrow. So it's actually this is our T2. And this is important because if I were to stack them, just like it is in the score, that's not T2. This is T10. Yeah. So I need to rearrange it. All right. Now, before you already get suspicious that here I am messing with the score, we do this in other cases. We rearrange notes in chords to notice its affinity to other chords. We use all the time with inversion. Right? And so even though we have a different note in the bass, we can say, oh, it's still a 2 chord. Right? Because we flip things around. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. This would be T2. And then, and by the way, I should probably be, inversion is not just a directed. It is actually its own inverse. So I'm going to take off the arrowhead instead of putting on 2 of them because I'm being lazy. So that means the same thing as a double-headed arrow. Let's see what we've got here. All right. So, so this is an I. Would that be I? What? 7. And this is an I. 5. Is it the same network? It's actually not the exact same network, is it? It's not quite. All right. So, but even though they're not the same network, they can be related by, what's this? It's on the bottom of your handout. This is an automorphism, specifically outer or inner. When you see the angle brackets, as opposed to, these are outer automorphisms. So then you look at the variety of outer automorphisms that you've got, and you ask yourself, okay, which one would keep the transposition operation the same, but then add 2 to the subscripts of the inversion operations. Yep. Tell me if you don't see it. So this automorphism is acting on the operations in the network and changing these to match these. But this is actually kind of fun because of that. Remember this from the Shostakovich on Wednesday? That we noticed that the label I was using for the automorphism matched one of the labels that was within a network. In that case, it was another network. It was the M4, M5, M6 one. Yeah. But this is interesting and perhaps not coincidental, right? Perhaps an indication of some kind of design.
Just to be clear, it's T2 because 3 plus 2 is 5 and 5 plus 2 is 7. Is that how you got T2?
Correct.
That's just want to be sure.
Yeah, exactly right. So we're using, on the bottom, it's that rule number, let's see, so first of all, outer automorphisms. There they are. We're not using these. These would be generated using the method that you did on the last assignment. Unfortunately, this only makes half of them. This is the way you get all of them. This gives you 12, this gives you 24. So T2, by applying rule number 1, T2 says don't change the transpositions. Keep them the same. But change the inversions by adding that subscript of the automorphism to each one of the inversion subscripts. And the great thing about it, since an automorphism preserves the group structure, we know that that network on the right is just as well formed as the one on the left. Yeah. So, this is kind of interesting. Of all the possible chords that Schoenberg could have chosen to emulate bells in this music, we have then at least 2 of the chords that are related by, an automorphism that then matches the transposition within the networks themselves. That's kind of interesting. Again, suggests some sort of design. Yeah. Let's look at the other bell chord, and let's see if we can configure that. That's something that you might want to try kind of just on your own. So what are the notes in the third bell chord we haven't discussed yet? C, F, and B flat. So give this a try with C, F, and B flat. Write them on your page such that, first of all, the T2 is between the bottom and the top. Right? So pick the right 2 notes such that what you write on the bottom, if you apply T2 to it, gives you the note on the top. And then apply the inversion operations. See what you get. And I'll kind of keep going through it up here, but see if you can do it on your own first. This is what I've got. Same network as the first bell chord. Yeah. Same exact network. So therefore, just to be thorough here, the automorphism relating them would be T0, the identity. Nothing changed. Now Willing starts adding names to some of these, because we're using automorphisms as essentially the technology, that's the function relating them. But the words, the vocabulary, this is called, it's isography in general. So whenever we have 2 networks that have the same graph or same sort of network, we're referring to this as isography. And yeah, so in the case of an exact match, we can just use the term isography by itself. If they relate by some kind of T automorphism, we'll call that a positive isography. If they relate by some kind of inversion automorphism, that's negative. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, this is all well and good. This does now use group theory to suggest some kind of design in this. But is there any way at all you can help me hear this one? Because right now this seems extremely abstract, seems extremely divorced from some kind of oral experience. Is there any way you can connect this to something I could actually hear? Can I hear, for example, that two chords would be related by T0 or T2? Yeah. Yeah. It takes a little bit of effort, but it's effort that Lewin is willing to put in because, again, he's interested not just in the abstraction of it all, but is this something that we can start hearing? And bear in mind, you know, just to throw in a little footnote here, when we think about, say, what happened in harmonic theory in the 18th century, with people like Jean-Philippe Rameau, right, who said, hey, we're going to label these chords differently. Not by, I'm not going to call that a 6-3 because it's in first inversion. I'm not going to call this, oh, it's a G chord because it's a G in the bass. He relabels it. He actually thinks of chords differently. He says, let's find what we would call today the root. In the 18th century, that was a very strange concept. The whole idea of a root. What do you mean a root? That's just silly. You have a bass note and you have the notes up above it. What do you mean that that's the bass note? That's just silly. That's being played by the second violin. It's not a bass note. No, it's a root. Yeah, it's not a bass note. So, yeah, I see some parallels there, where again, how can I hear this? And yet, having that notion of a root really impacted how we think about syntax of tonal music. Maybe there's something here that can tell us about the syntax of some of this kind of music, some of this kind of modernist music. I don't know, but again, we should, I think, give it a try. So, what is it about, what makes the relationship between these special, something that we can hear? Well, let me try to, here, I'm going to erase this, keep this, and try to show it in another way. And to do so, I might have to rearrange things a bit, like I've already done, because again, this is not how the chord's stacked, right? It's stacked with the C on the bottom, C, F, E flat. But given this stack, there is a certain way we can arrange it. So what I'm going to do is instead kind of lump together the two notes that are related by transposition, and I will put then the third note kind of off on its own. It's like the odd note out. So then let's look at the other, A and B. And I'm writing them just a little bit lower on the whiteboard. You notice that? Just a little lower. What's the third note in the second bell chord here, or the first one in the music? It's F sharp, which I want to write a little bit higher. Yeah. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Something that might start becoming audible. When you have this kind of isography, you're going to get this kind of wedging going on. So essentially, the chord, whatever it is, and it can be 3 notes, it can be 4 notes, it can be 5 notes, however you want, the chord will be divided into 2 parts. You know, much like, again, odd and even, right? You got a group of numbers, they can be divided into the odds and the evens. Kind of group them that way. And then, if you have this isographic relationship, what will happen is that those 2 different parts will wedge in contrary motion one another. Yeah. And Lewin actually, in that article, in that music theory spectrum article, he takes some time to try to lead your ear toward hearing this. So, you know, there's that first chord, right? And then later on, here's the, that's the third bell chord, which happens a little later. So he says, well, imagine if you're to take these outer voices, flip them around, right? So now there's the B and the A. And then take this, and then have the 7th go up, but the middle note go down. So here's, again, the bell chord, but rearranged. And then I'm going to do this. So essentially what I'm playing here I'm kind of simulating this just in a more close packed situation. So F sharp A, and then I'm going to go to F, which is a little down, B flat, and C, which is a little bit up. Not to scale. So essentially, we're dividing the chord into two parts, and they are then moving in contrary motion by the same interval, thus creating another chord. But that other chord doesn't have to be in the same equivalence class, by transposition, by inversion, by multiplication. No, it can actually yield something new. And while Schoenberg doesn't do this right on the surface, Lewin's trying to make the case that, well, there's still a way to kind of twist around things such that this can become more of our oral experience. Yeah. So this is quite interesting. And there can be situations where you have this real literal kind of wedging in music and where this becomes even more appropriate as a label. How would this then work with our T2? You want to guess then what the T2 might mean relative to what we're seeing here. Again, partitioning the chord into two parts, and then each of them kind of wedging symmetrically, either outward or inward, by the same number of semitones. That'll produce that isographic connection. But if it's by some other number besides T0, like T2, for example, what would that look like? So let me show you that. So let's go back to that opening chord, and again, we'll kind of group things together. So let's see, I'll put the A on the bottom this time. Okay. And then the F sharp. And now let's do the GCF chord. GCF. So first of all, F and G is what would match this. Maybe I should go a little lower. A little lower, a little lower. Okay, F and G. There we are. So that transposition would be by how much? I really think literally in terms of it's down 4 semitones. Right? Down 4 semitones. The note that's remaining here is the C. That is up how many semitones? Tritone is 6. How then might this, what's been called dual transposition model, relate to the automorphism we had for this one? Do you remember what it was? It was T2. Right. And the fact that, yeah, I'm using, say, a negative here, we can see as, yeah, a sum. Another way to think of this, well, yeah, let's stick with that. You know, I was thinking that I think maybe a safer way to go, if you want to just think in terms of pitch class, is that it's not so much a sum, it is the difference. Well, no, let's go with sum. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, that's fine. Because in the symmetrical version, right, we would have, say, 2 that would be inverses of one another. So those would sum to 0, which would correspond to the identity automorphism. Here, yeah, they're slightly askew. We've kind of messed with the symmetry of it all. Yeah. And so in this case, that's 8. All right, so it's 6 plus 8 will give us 2. All right, and that 2 then relates to the hybrid T2 that we have here before. So this is one way to actually make these kinds of connections more than just these very abstract automorphisms. So we're great for group theory, but again, where's the oral sort of experience? So that's one way to connect it. And the more the music actually uses these types of wedging designs, instead of it being abstracted into a pitch class space, the more that this can interact with our direct oral experience in music. Because there are going to be kinds of music that use an exact symmetrical wedging. All right, so this is music of Bartók. And Bartók occasionally liked to write music that was very sort of mirror-like, right? Everything the left hand does is a mirror of what the right hand is doing. All right, so both parts went up by semitone, they go back down by semitone, but again, mirrored one another. So right hand down, left hand up. So in those situations, that would be all T0, reflecting kind of this mirroring wedging that's going on. What then any positive isography for something other than 0 would represent is some kind of skewing. If the music departs from that symmetry ever so slightly, then this starts to grow, right? So see if you can tell me when that happens in this music. At some point, Bartók actually deviates from the symmetrical wedge. At some point in there. It's right there, yeah. Because the right hand goes up by how much? Goes up by whole step. The left hand goes down by half step. You want to guess what that's going to be? Instead of T0, 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 this will be a T. Because the deviation from symmetry is by a single semitone. Yeah. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit because a lot of us responded to Schopenhauer's ideas. In fact, there was one guy at Florida State said, I don't think so. And he was really, of course, he described himself as math grumpy. Says, anytime when he gets this abstract and starts getting farther away from the musical experience, that's when, he starts getting upset and starts writing. And he used to be like a math guy. I mean, he wrote a lot of technical stuff and he kind of changed his tune. And so he wrote an article called Reconsidering Schopenhauer Networks. And it had some very good cases to make because I've been talking about positive isography. Positive isography is something that we, I think, can find ways to hear. And like the Bartók, it can reflect, I think, something that's pretty direct on the surface. Negative isography? Good luck with that. I mean, none of us have found a direct sort of perceptual connection to what that I subscript N would mean. What is the N? I don't know. Very abstract. So let's try another one. There's another sort of 3-note chord I think we could spend a little time with, again, to try to find design. But yeah, questions?
Does David Lewin just leave out notes that are preserved? Would he, if there were in this specific piece that he studies, would he just leave out notes that are the same between two chords because they be T0 and would contribute to this whole summing up of the indices? Because you talked about, you said there were 2 options, but there's the third where they just the chord remains through the transition.
Okay, I'm almost with you. Tell me if this is what you mean, because I think I know what you mean. Because it is possible to say analyze a 2-note chord with the same.
Well, I'm saying like C, E, and G, and then it transitions to A, C, or not A, C, because there are 2 chords making them, but another chord like
that has one of those same notes?
Yeah, it just has one of them.
Okay,
How
so
do you represent that here?
C, E, G, and say CFA?
Yeah.
Okay, this is maintained?
Yeah.
All right, well, in tonal theory, I could see that even though this is preserved, we would still group these notes together into, say, certain labels. This is, say, the bass note. That might be a way to do this. So with network theory, we could still, even though there's a note that's preserved, we could do the same thing. We could then look at how these chords could be interpreted, even though they share a note.
Yeah, I'm talking more about the wedges over there on the right-hand side of the board, rather than this stuff.
Ah, right. Yes, the wedges. And so, well, actually, this is a good case in point if I did this. Let me do that. It's a minor 4 chord. So in this case, we would have, say, a situation. I see what you're getting at. Whereby we would still divide the chord into 2 parts that are moving in kind of different trajectories. In this case, it would be divided like this. Both of these would be headed up by semitone, and this would be staying on the same note by semitone.
Yeah.
This would be, I don't know if it's T1 or T11. I'm going to go T11. because to be symmetrical, this would wedge downward. So actually, I do think it's 2-1. So this is a single semitonal break from that symmetry. Instead of wedging downwards by the same interval that this goes up, it stays in the same note. But that's only a 1 semitone differential. So even if it's maintaining the same note, we can still speak of some kind of automorphism. This one's a little more abstract because, yeah, again, what happens, say, if they're both going up but by similar motion, right? So then that becomes even more abstract. So this is deviating even more from what would have been symmetrical contrary motion. But it is possible. Yeah. What I thought you were asking initially, but it's good to bring up, is that you can even do this when you have, say, a doubling or even just a 2-note chord. Because, for example, if this process were to continue, you would eventually double up on the C. So you could even have chords like this. And you could do the same thing. I0, I4, T4. So if you're doubling, or if you're even just have 2 notes, you can imagine those as kind of splitting off or something. Let's try another one. What am I planning to do today? Is we're doing 3-note chords today. We'll do 4-note chords on Monday. But there's another 3-note chord, I think it's pretty important in this piece, that also has a minor 7th in it. So look through later in the piece and look for a pretty conspicuous minor 7th that then is part of a harmony. I mean, there's the very last 2 notes, right? But I'm really looking for 2 notes that then have a 3rd added. It's just not simultaneous altogether. What measure do you find at least a harmonic minor 7th played together outside of our bell chords? Measure 5. And measure 5 has that low E and D. And then the G sharp is added on top of it. Now, these 3 notes together, again, to go back to our equivalence classes, they don't match either. The 025 and the 027 of the 3 bell chords we've had up to now. And yet, network theory, sort of Kloppenauer network theory, allows us to potentially compare them, either with the exact sort of isographic T0, or maybe some kind of positive isography. You notice that we don't even have any perfect 4ths or 5ths here. I mean, unlike the 2 bell chords here, we could have also tried to maintain the perfect 4th as our T, right? Instead of preserving the minor 7th, major 2nd, we could preserve the perfect 4th, perfect 5th. And that would be another way to have 1 T, 2 I's. Here, we don't have any of that. So really, this is going to be kind of our one way to go, I suppose. Yeah. So let's try with this one. Let's try to configure the same kind of network for this. So go ahead and design a network with those 3 notes. I realize the G sharp results in the F sharp, but let's just stick with those 3 bass clef notes in measure 5, and design a network whereby we use the same T2 that we've been using up to now, and see what kind of inversion operations you get. And then see if there's a way we can relate it to some of the networks we already have, which I'll rewrite on the board here, even as I erase them. So I'll just start numbering these things. So bell chord 1. Just do this as, again, I've used T2 from bottom to top. Just having to rearrange it. Chord 2 is the G here. 1, G, T2. Let's be flat. we put the D on the bottom, even though it has to rearrange things in register. G sharp. So what do we got here? We've got I, 10. So here's what I've got for that network. Does it match what you've got? Yeah? Okay, good. What are the automorphisms that would relate it back to networks 1, 2, and 3 for those earlier Bell chords? So we know that the automorphism will be the same to 1 and 3. So maybe we can just relate it to, say, 2 and 3. So we're looking just to know what that is, right? And we're also looking to know this is. So, from Bell chord 3 to chord 4, what is the automorphism? T7, because that's what I have to add to the inversion subscripts here to make them the inversion subscripts here. Okay. You know, the great thing about this is that automorphisms make a group just like our 12-tone operators do. So, if we're doing it right, let me turn that around, make it easier, then this should be the composition of T10 with T7, which would be T17, which would be T5. So I don't even have to look, but now I look, and oh, it looks like T5. Yeah. So, all well and good, you know, again, it seems to match, but where is the argument for design? Now that we've added this fourth chord to the mix, see some of these new automorphisms that are emerging here. Do we see any potential for some kind of, again, self-similarity, some kind of, relationship to something on another level? What do you think? T5, T7. Maybe it would help if I flip this around, put this back to T2. So, I don't know if that helps at all. There's actually a pretty cool connection here. T5 without the angle brackets would be what interval? The smallest interval for T5 would be a perfect fourth, right? So perfect fourth, whole step, completing them the entire thing. That's a 027 chord, right? So we can take either of these chords and write them in exactly the same way. And in fact, we can do so by really making them more like how they were originally stacked. Right? Here I'm kind of going in time. Now I'm going back to the original registral ordering. We'll kind of complete the cycle in this case. T5, T5, T2. It's the same network, right? This is a network of 12-tone operators. This is a network of automorphisms acting on the networks, but they match. Yeah. So again, using these automorphisms suggests some kind of design. Not only, say, between, say, two networks that have the same exact sort of design, but also between a network of pitch classes and a network of networks, finding those connections. This is something that Kloppenhauer-Lewin saw as a way to claim unity in a post-tonal composition, which is kind of a big deal because, I mean, that was essentially the 19th or early 20th century, right? How do we establish unity in tonal music? Shaker comes along and says, I'll show you. But then, to do this in post-tonal music, this has also been a big, sort of holy grail. These folks are, Alan Ford really tried hard, to do this. But this was then a new way that Lewin and Kloppenhauer suggested. Again, finding some kind of hidden design that suggested some kind of, self-similarity, right? Oh my gosh, this chord, when it's manifest into a progression of chords, has the same, quote-unquote, same structure. That's kind of a big deal, because otherwise, I mean, can you make sense of what I played earlier? Why did Schoenberg choose the chords he did? Sounds all random to me, right? This is one way to suggest maybe it's not random. And maybe Schomer wasn't thinking along these lines, but it still suggests some kind of design. That these types of connections wouldn't necessarily emerge, at least this fairly quickly, if these nodes had been just chosen at random. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe it would be the other way. But here's one way. So what we're going to do on Monday is that we'll do this now with 4 node chords. So we'll look at another piece of Schoenberg, and then I'll step you through what Lewin does with that. And but I'm going to go ahead and already post the assignments and give you a good week to work on it. So it'll be up later today. And the assignment will have references to both the article that I talked about today from Spectrum, and then the one I'll talk about on Monday. And then it'll kind of tell you what the challenge is. Yeah. So I did it again, didn't I? I got to send around. Where else? No, no. But she left. That's right, she left. So, good. All right. And I'll also post the video that I just recorded on Blackboard if you need to review. Yeah. And hopefully I'm not blocking all of that all the time. Hopefully it's still recording.
Yeah.